Thank you very much to the four buglers from His Majesty the King's Guards Band. And good afternoon, Minister, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and of course, to our participants who are following this streaming from Oslo. Warmly welcome to you too. My name is Håkon Haugsbø, and on behalf of the Norwegian Army and the Norwegian Atlantic Committee, I warmly welcome you all to Army Summit 2021, the 13th in a row. Let's hope, despite the numbers, that this is our lucky day, when we finally are able to meet physically in Oslo after the pandemic and the following lockdown and social isolation. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a historically strong reminder for all of us of how rapidly our way of living, working, and socializing can be shifting from one day to another. It has also given us a clearer view, perhaps, on the various perspectives on freedom. Perhaps has it also ignited a warning light when it comes to our perspectives on international trade and travel, polarization, and politics on a domestic level. Our ability as national states to handle a global crisis. And the pandemic has definitively underlined the fact that total defense is more than troops and tanks. It's also about trust, face masks, distance, and our ability to act as one community across sectors and silos. Total defense is the headline for these 2 days, and we have a very strong lineup for this afternoon, ranging from, let me just sort my papers, ranging from a 4-star German NATO general, a former British, let me say, connected guy, connected to a guy called 007, and of course we have the Norwegian Chief of Army. But I think we should start on the civil side, which has also been object for shifting times due to the election in September. Let's start with lending ears and eyes to the Norwegian Minister of Defense. Please welcome Frank Bakke-Jensen. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, dear friends, thank you for this opportunity to give face to what we are defending, democracy. And let me also take the opportunity to apologize for me entering without a tie. But Unni, chief of my office, I said, "Where's my tie?" And she said, "Sorry, Minister, it's packed and sent to Tromsø." Let me use this opportunity to share some thoughts on this year's main topic, the total defense concept. Army Summit has become one of the most important Norwegian arenas for professional military discussions. And that leads me to say that I'm especially pleased that this year the format is what has become known as a hybrid event. Then we'll achieve knowledge and communication after the conference tells us whether this would be seen as a hybrid threat. I don't think so. But combining physical presence with digital attendance it gives us an opportunity for everyone to attend. And I remember one of my first appearances as a Minister of Defense was at Army Summit. We have been through strange days, looking at each other on walls. Learned a lot, and I think the ability to combine this, have this hybrid event, will take us further. So I would like to wish you the best of luck for this year's Army Summit. Looking forward to following the development of the Army in the years ahead. 1 year ago, the government presented a new long-term defense plan to Parliament. The plan calls for further development of the Army. Brigade North will be strengthened towards 4 maneuver battalions. They will be equipped with new main battle tanks, air defense systems, and long-range precision fire. Increased firepower, higher readiness, and increased sustainability will ensure that the Norwegian armed forces will remain relevant. But the changing strategic environment also emphasizes the need to clarify and reinforce the mutually dependent factors Norwegian security is based upon. The new long-term defense plan presents an update of Norway's defense concept. And the defense of Norway has 3 main lines of effort. These are national defense, the collective defense within the framework of NATO, and bilateral support and reinforcement arrangements with close allies. Our national defense relies on a modern and well-prepared total defense concept that supports the 3 main lines of effort. The total defense concept also builds national resilience and reduces vulnerabilities when faced with hybrid threats. The recent pandemic demonstrated the need for close cooperation between the armed forces and civil authorities. Continued allied activity in Norway during the pandemic has been important for Norwegian security, necessitating close coordination between the armed forces and local and regional authorities, especially in the health and public safety sector. At the same time, the armed forces have supported the police with border control. The original total defense concept came into being after the Second World War and was formed in the light of the perceived threat from the Soviet Union. Thus, its focus was total war and a total mobilization of the nation's resources in support of the armed forces. Extensive civilian support to Norwegian armed forces in crisis and in war is still at the core of the total defense concept. Our armed forces are dependent on the civilian sector in peace as well as in times of crisis and conflict. Examples of such areas are fuel supply, health services, and transportation. If necessary, all national resources can and will be mobilized in the defense of Norway. However, today's modernized total defense concept differs from the one we had during the Cold War. The security environment that has emerged during recent years that dictates a broader effort. As a result, today's total defense concept includes mutual civil-military support, as well as crisis management across the entire crisis spectrum. The government has the highest executive responsibility for both military and civilian emergency preparedness. This includes peacetime as well as when dealing with crisis and armed conflict. The responsibility for prevention, emergency preparedness, and responsibility for crisis management is mainly assigned to the individual ministries. These are organized according to the 4 main principles: responsibility, similarity, proximity, and collaboration. The principle of responsibility means that the body that is responsible on a daily basis for an area is also responsible for prevention and emergency preparedness, as well as for the implementation of necessary measures in actual emergencies and disasters. The principle of similarity means that the organization should be as similar as possible in peacetime and during crisis management. The principle of proximity means that the crises are to be handled at the lowest possible organizational level. And the principle of collaboration means that everyone has an independent responsibility to ensure cooperation with relevant actors and agencies. Our overall defense effort relies on a whole-of-government approach. The Ministry of Justice and Public Security has the main responsibility for coordinating civilian efforts to the total defense concept. Civil-military cooperation will be further modernized within the framework of the concept of total defense. As mentioned, the modernized total defense concept comprises mutual support and cooperation between the armed forces and civil society. It also builds resilience and civil preparedness to counter complex security challenges. The total defense concept is flexible. In some cases, the Norwegian armed forces support civil authorities, such as the already mentioned border control during the pandemic. Other potential cases of support from the armed forces to civil society can be natural disasters, accidents, and terrorism. Total defense as a concept is intended to ensure the best possible utilization of society's limited resources, especially when it comes to prevention, contingency planning, and consequence management across the entire spectrum of crisis. For the total concept to be credible, it needs to work, from central government all the way down to the tactical level. This requires daily cooperation, extensive liaison activities, as well as regular exercises, so that all parties know each other's responsibilities and needs. Within the framework of the total defense concept, a number of professional fora and civil-military cooperation bodies have been established, both at the central and regional levels, as well as the local level. Most of these cooperating bodies are subject-specific. Thus, they have their mandate within a limited area of the total defense concept. The National Total Defense Forum, however, represents a large part of the total defense actors. There, the principal civil and military agencies and the directorates cooperating in the total defense are represented. It is a forum for mutual orientation, collaboration, and overall coordination of relevant total defense-related issues. Today's strategic environment necessitates an increased level of civil-military cooperation to safeguard both societal and national security. Norway's defense concept encompasses mutual support and cooperation between the armed forces and civil society. This includes contingency planning, crisis management, and consequent management across the entire crisis spectrum. The pandemic has clearly demonstrated both the importance and functioning of our total defense concept, a concept that will be strengthened and developed further in the years to come. Thank you for your attention, and good luck with the conference.
And thank you, Minister, for your words and for being here with us today. And I would like to say also good luck in your further coming position. Norway has a long tradition for total defense, and this unique concept was shaped just after the ending of World War II. But what is total defense in a Norwegian context? And why is this concept so important for our international and national security and protection? These are just a couple of the reflections the Chief of the Norwegian Army will share with us now. Please be welcome on the stage, Major General Lars Lervik.
Thank you very much, Håkon. Minister, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants following us online, a warm welcome to this year's Army Summit. First of all, thank you, Minister of Defense Frank Bakke-Jensen, for your opening speech and reflections. And it's a pleasure to have you here with us at the Ridderhuset in Oslo. This is the 13th Army Summit since the first conference was arranged back in 2009. And I'm delighted to be gathered with you all for today's session. together with our co-host, the General Secretary of the Norwegian Atlantic Committee, Mrs. Kate Hansen-Bundt. We are glad, both of us, that so many of you are joining us online today and tomorrow. I look forward to answering questions, discussing, and getting to the depth of the subject of total defense together. This first day of the Army Summit, we will look closer into the total defense concept, talking about total defense with an international perspective. On that matter, we are really lucky to have Professor Sir David Omand here with us, former UK Secretary and Intelligence Director. Sir David is also former Director of the Government Communication Headquarters, the GCHQ, and I look forward to your keynote and to have a talk about the subject on total defense together. I'm also very pleased that General Jörg Vollmer, a commander of the Allied Joint Forces Command Brunssum, and one of 3 operational level commanders in the NATO command structure, is talking to us later this evening. These 2 distinguished gentlemen will give us valuable perspectives on both the inner workings of a specific close ally and an overarching view on our alliance. Diving into Norway and our total defense concept, I will now concentrate my remarks on 3 key questions. What, why, and how? What is the total defense in a Norwegian context? Why is total defense important for our national and international security and protection? And finally, how do we make total defense work? I want to start by conveying what the Norwegian total defense concept is. Even though the Minister of Defense has already covered it, I will discuss some of the rather unique parts of our defense concept. The Norwegian defense concept works both ways. It is a civil-military defense that describes the whole of government approach to security and defense, and it also includes a cooperation with our most important allies. On one hand, total defense is about the military supporting civilians. As we experienced during the horrible natural disaster, the landslide at Gjerdrum outside of Oslo in December last year. The landslide was over 200,000 square meters. Many people lost their homes, and 10 people were killed. We saw highly competent personnel from different civilian and military branches tasking themselves before the rescue and evacuation plan formally was set in action. From the Army, we developed several capabilities, including intelligence analysts, combat engineers, and medics. Our Norwegian total defense rose to the occasion and executed the rescue mission in a very, very professional manner. On the other hand, total defense is also about civilians supporting the military. We saw this play out at Trident Juncture in 2018. This was the largest NATO exercise in Norway since the end of the Cold War. The exercise gathered around 50,000 participants, 250 aircraft, 65 ships, and 10,000 land vehicles from 31 nations. Trident Juncture was also a great test for our Norwegian total defense. How we, our total military and civilian resources together, successfully managed the military effort. A total defense gives us the ability to be adaptive and use our resources more efficiently, both in the low end, where defense comes to aid of civilian capacities when civilian capacities are insufficient, and all the way up to the high end, where the military relies on civilian infrastructure and support systems in order for all of us to defend the nation. Together, this gives us an ability to handle challenges across the spectrum, from natural disasters all the way to armed conflict and war. And it is not the armed forces alone that defends Norway. Norway defends Norway. That is what our total defense concept is all about. Let's then move on to why the issue of total defense is important. Hopefully, it is already obvious for most of you, as it makes us able to defend ourselves in peace, crisis, and war against traditional, digital, or hybrid threats. In Norway, the military resources are limited compared with the total requirement in a crisis or a conflict. The total defense concept allows us in the military to focus on core warfighting capabilities. Some of our needs in regards to sustainment and infrastructure can be met by the civilian society. An example is that the number of available airports for military operation is significantly increased when we include all the civilian airports. Another essential issue for a total defense is the ability to work across sectors and agencies. We saw this clearly, and saw the importance of this clearly during the tragic water floods in Western Germany in July this summer. The German army did a tremendous job sending personnel and heavy equipment to assist in the rescue efforts. In a multinational perspective, as members of NATO, we are dependent on our allies. In that way, cooperation within the total defense system offers a strategic value. An example is how we use civilian infrastructure and capabilities to move the Norwegian Enhanced Forward Present Unit back and forth between Norway and Lithuania with civilian ships, civilian trains, and civilian planes. How do we, as allies in NATO, make the total defense work? I will approach this question highlighting three important aspects: dialogue, mission rehearsal, and knowledge-based action. Talking to each other, finding common ground, and understanding our differences makes us better. An example of such a dialogue is actually what's happening here today. Just as important is the daily contact we have between our units and the different agencies. That is one way in how we can strengthen a total defense concept together. The upcoming NATO exercise, Cold Response 2022 in Norway, is an excellent arena for mission rehearsal with both our civilian and our allied partners. Sharing critical information, establishing best practices will set an example not only for the exercise, but also for how we can handle upcoming situation and crisis in the future. Total defense in this context allows for great flexibility in execution with both centralized and decentralized models, and also nationally as well as internationally. The third aspect to make a total defense work is knowledge-based action. As I think we in Norway and also our allies have experienced during the global pandemic, the effect of transferring valuable knowledge to each other is that we build trust and common confidence in what we can achieve together. The more we know about our different total defense concepts and what we have in common, the better we can support and guide each other in crisis, internally or across borders. This is why this year's topic of the Army Summit is highly relevant, as the distinction between peace, crisis, and war fades every hour and every day. This is what total defense is all about: the military supporting civilians and civilians supporting the military. Norway defends Norway in cooperation with our allied partners in peace, crisis, and war. That is why we must talk about what a total defense is and how to make it work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. Welcome to my little headquarters here. I thought we could have a chat and also invite Sir David for a Q&A after his speech. But I want to ask you firstly, firstly, I'm going to remind all of you, the audience here in Oslo and the participants on screen, that you can send us your questions if you use slido.com and if you use the conference code, which should be displayed on the screen now, soon. Please send us your questions, hashtag AS21, and I will have them on the iPad on stage, and I'll do my level best to give you the best answers to your questions afterwards. And then, General, let's talk about total defense. It's one of your favorite topics, I know. The total defense concept is resting on the idea of a close and trustful cooperation between our military and military forces and the civil society. Like we saw along the Swedish-Norwegian borders during the COVID-19 pandemic, what effort did the Norwegian army put into the handling of the pandemic?
We did several things, but I would like to especially point out to what we, and also especially the Home Guard, did in regards to reinforcing the control on our borders. That was a small, but I think important effort in the overall Norwegian, what I would say was a successful handling of the COVID pandemic. In addition, I hope it also has some long-term effects, because I think the trust being built by soldiers and police officers and others, custom officials, working together, not only for a couple of days, but for months and years, that is something which I think we can come to rely on and take advantage of in the future.
What about trust between your troops and civilians, who perhaps hardly have seen people in uniform before?
I think also potentially we presented a different perspective on actually what our armed forces are capable of doing by reinforcing what many would perceive as a purely civilian task, but also using the military to assist.
Let's see how this experience was for one of your soldiers, serving with His Majesty the King's Guard, and all of a sudden he was deployed to the Norwegian border during some critical days.
It was just a normal day, a normal Monday. It's kind of funny actually. Some of us, we thought we could sleep a bit longer than we actually could. And then our sergeant, he came in and it became a big fuss. And then he later on, he came in and it was like, I got a surprise for you guys that like to sleep so much. Zambo, you're gonna get like 3 guys per team and you're gonna go on a deployment to Svinesund. Our function, first of all, we got a request from the region of Svinesund, a civil request to the military for us to help out. And that was not only for solely the King's Guard, it was several branches of the army here in Norway. So the main function was to do testing at the border of people, passing by all the time. That was the main function, but mostly because that region was not able to do all the testing themselves, so they had to ask the army for help. The way it felt for me to get that type of deployment was pretty interesting. Like, I was 20 years old and you get asked to represent His Majesty the King's Guard and lead team on a deployment in the midst of a global pandemic. I didn't really realize the greatness of what I personally was doing down there. To me, it was just another mission. I was used to, getting asked to do stuff while in the military, so it wasn't too unnatural. But when I came back, I started to sort of realize like severity of the situation and what we were actually doing down there. We were, I would say, very well prepared. We always have our stuff sort of ready. The King's Guard, we have stuff very easily accessible. That was older routines that they taught us, the procedures and all that came in, handy when we were supposed to deploy very, very quickly. To me, it was a bit more special. It felt like I actually did something. It felt like I contributed, not only like through me, but I showed what I was capable of doing. I showed what my team was capable of doing, and most of all, His Majesty the King's Guard was able to do too. Through the deployment, through everything we did down there, the quick deployment, everything. It's very cool to look back and be like, during my military service, did testing at the Norwegian border during a pandemic. That was cool.
Yeah, that was cool for sure. General, do you think we will see responses like these more often in the future?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm certain on that we will be surprised again. So having the flexibility just presented perfectly here by this young soldier. Actually, we're not in the business of choosing our task. We are actually in the business of solving the task we are given by our democratic elected officials. And also having these kinds of soldiers at the border, here in Oslo, also in Iraq and Lithuania, or in the northern Norway, well, everything is possible, to be honest.
Yeah. You're not picking your tasks and targets, but I will soon be picking the best questions. If you please hand them over to me, log into slido.com, use the conference code #AS21, and ask General Lervik your best questions and also the coming keynote speakers. We're talking about conference codes, which reminds me of codes. This weekend, the latest James Bond movie were screened in cinemas in Norway. Extremely delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, of course, but nevertheless are happening as it always is when 007 enters town. And on top of that, also with the action scenes filmed in Norwegian nature. Meanwhile, James Bond entered the movies. Another capacity on intelligence arrived in town under the cover of the rainy and stormy weather. Our next guest on stage is Sir David Omand, who served as the director of the government communication headquarters, and he was positioned more or less on top of all British intelligence. In his latest book, he revealed for us how spies think. Now, I'm excited, Sir David, to hear what you think. Total defense in an international perspective is the keyword, and the floor is yours, sir.
General, thank you very much for the invitation to come to this summit. I can't tell you how good it feels to be back in Oslo in person, having had to give all my lectures to the National Defence University by Zoom and Teams over the last year. Rather like Daniel Craig, however, in the James Bond movies, I'm getting old. But despite all those restrictions that COVID-19 has brought us, here we are in person. COVID-19 is an example of an ancient phenomenon, infectious disease. It was one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the book of Revelations. And with international trade and international travel, COVID became a global pandemic, and no country could dodge it. And the experience, I think, has given some interesting insights for defense planners into how you deal with natural hazards interacting with defense. For example, maintaining submarine and ship and aircrew rosters during quarantine restrictions, keeping forces operationally effective, whilst establishing social distancing in supply and repair and support facilities, gyms, mess halls, and so on. And natural hazards can make existing threats worse. COVID-19 has brought a rise in opportunistic cyber attacks by criminals, particularly on those of us who are working from home and dependent on social media. I was very impressed with the deployments that the Norwegian army has made to help border control and COVID testing, because terrorists could easily have taken advantage of temporary difficulties in border control during periods of disruption. The distraction of senior leadership in the West during a crisis also offers opportunistic possibilities for adventurism by hostile states. And there are indirect second and third order effects of COVID. It's certainly prompting us in the UK to rethink the boundaries of what ought to be included within defence planning in the future, the scope of the missions of the armed forces, the enlargement of the involvement of the Ministry of Defence in the expanding national security space that covers hazards as well as threats. As I speak, UK military personnel are being trained to drive commercial fuel tankers due to a shortage of civilian drivers. Now, there is some suspicion in the UK sometimes that this is about a takeover of civil responsibilities, securitizing functions that are essentially civil. But in Norway, you already know with your total defence concept that managing civil risks needs army support and the army needs civil support. You understand that here. But in the UK, we've got a bit of catching up to do about how best to organise our national resources for an all-of-nation response. So working with local, regional, national officials, health and social care professionals, and so on, to take in our long-term forecasts the natural hazard side as well as the malign threat side into account. And climate change is going to create more difficulties in that respect. COVID also reminds us of the value of early intervention when a natural disaster strikes, and to think in advance of contingency planning, stockpiles, a little bit more investment in system resilience. We've been surprised, perhaps, to find difficulties with some of the supply chains. They run deep and increasingly overseas. We have dependence on globalized supply chains, even in some low-tech areas. And at least some of the fragility of defence supply chains comes, I have to admit, as a former official of the British Ministry of Defence, from the relentless search by defence departments for greater efficiencies in supply and repair and support network, trying to free up defence resources for other priorities, as well perhaps as defence contractors seeking to keep up their profit rates. But low-cost sourcing overseas may be superficially attractive, but it can be a source of fragility. Another related problem is just-in-time logistic engineering. We've now got greater availability of data because we can instrument platforms and systems, armoured vehicles, ships, and so on. We can build digital twins to work out when is the best time to replace components. You couple that with cheap computing and global communications, and you can engineer exquisite, precise, just-in-time logistics systems that we simply couldn't have had 10 years ago. But, and it's a big but, if that's at the expense of resilience to unforeseen impacts on the system, it will prove a false economy when the unexpected happens, as indeed it has done with COVID. And we're going to have to keep a very careful watch on our adversaries, looking for ways to capitalize on any misfortunes that may befall us. We may consider that hitting a man when he's down or distracted is unsporting, but that's what adversaries do. In my latest book, which the General mentioned, called How Spies Think, I created an acronym, SEES, S-E-E-S, to remind us of our duty to try and see ahead. The first S stands for Situational Awareness, then Explanation, Estimation, and Strategic Notice. Not to predict the future. There are no crystal balls. Don't believe anyone who says that they know precisely what the future will bring. But to build situational awareness about what is going on, for example, in cyberspace, to be able to explain why we're seeing that evidence, and then you use that explanation to estimate the likelihood of events turning out in different ways. So you're building forwards from the recent past into the near future, and that's really, really useful for planners. not just to identify the most likely course of events. That, I fear, is something that politicians are too likely to grasp at, but also to identify the less likely, but if they were to occur, very damaging possibilities, the black swans. And we saw some of that, I fear, with the events in Kabul. The final S of C's is rather different. It's strategic notice, and it works the other way round. You identify possibly troubling futures on the basis of technology trends, climate change, geopolitical changes, and other trends, and you work backwards to now and start to think, with that strategic notice, is it going to be worth investing a bit more? So if that future comes to pass, we will be ready for it. And I just wish we had all done a little bit more of that kind of thinking before COVID hit us. Both the British government and the Norwegian government have the capacity, we have the scientific resources that can be engaged in seeing, remember my acronym SEAS, which possible events might crystallize into a significant risk. The level of risk depends both on the initial size of the impact, how far the turbulence spreads into society, and the duration of the ensuing disruption. And that will, of course, depend on how resilient we are as societies. And then governments and parliaments can engage in public debates about the trade-offs. Different types of risk will impact asymmetrically on different groups, citizen groups. The future generations and our generation, there's a trade-off. How much are we prepared to spend now to protect the interests of the next generation? The core of national security remains the defense of our territory, and I wouldn't want my remarks to imply anything else. We've done this successfully together through NATO. Those collective security arrangements remain essential. They need cherishing, they need nourishing. Our US ally needs encouragement in that respect and to feel supported in burden sharing. And as the United Kingdom is trying to do at the moment, recognizing that the United States has threats to face from the Pacific region as well. Personally, having been involved in crafting a lot of it, I think NATO defense and nuclear deterrence strategy remains fundamentally sound as the best way of deterring armed attacks on the territory of NATO members, and thus, and this is the crucial point, continuing to prevent major war in Europe. The British government, my government, published an integrated review of national security recently, and they made this point. But they also emphasized that now we've got to be prepared not just to deter war, but we've got to be prepared to engage in competition in the grey zone below the threshold for armed conflict. The response to state threats can no longer be viewed as only a traditional, quotes, defense agenda, or even a, quotes, national security one. It's going to have to be an all-of-nation effort to protect our democracy itself. And the challenge which the General has outlined is to bring together all the instruments available, including those controlled by the private sector and civil parts of government. So you can interpret this as the United Kingdom trying to catch up with Norway and the concept of total defense. But total defense today is not what it was 10 years ago, because we're now in the digital era. And we're now in the era of cyber power, which poses new challenges for us. What would it mean, I ask myself the question, what would it mean, therefore, for nations like the United Kingdom and Norway to be in the happy position of enjoying a state of national security in this digital future? My answer is, when there's trust on the part of the public that the risks from major threats and hazards facing the nation, including digital threats, are being sufficiently mitigated so that normal life can continue freely and with confidence. Freely meaning that we can achieve that aim of normality without extreme restrictions undermining the values and freedoms and rights we enjoy as democratic nations, or taking repressive measures outside the rule of law. With confidence, meaning that the key indicators of normal life are all positive, despite the risks. So high levels of economic activity, including digitally, research, innovation, stable markets, and so on, and a willingness of the public to exercise their democratic rights. But in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have learned what it is to be in a state of national insecurity. Confidence in government to take optimum decisions in a timely manner has been badly shaken in countries on both sides of the Atlantic. And we've got determined adversaries who are using cyberspace today to harm us and our democracy. So here's another acronym, which I've coined, CESPIT: crime, espionage, sabotage, and subversion, perverting internet technology. And we've got to do more to clean it out. Now, one of those areas where new challenge, where an integrated response is needed, is to counter hostile information operations directed against us and other NATO members. We are vulnerable to digital manipulation by Russia and indeed by other foreign states, spreading lies, for example, about the coronavirus, supporting anti-vaxxer conspiracy theories, suggesting that coronavirus originated in a US military biolab. This kind of disinformation has hit us on the back of a rising tide of social media, misinformation, half-truths, and information manipulation. We've experienced Russian attempts to hack into UK and US medical research labs to try and steal information about the vaccines that have been developed and that are so important for our return to normality after COVID. So we've got to do more to defend the working of our democratic institutions themselves. We need to defend our independence of action. We need to defend our ability, our freedom to think. In other words, we need these days to defend the minds of our peoples and protect our freedom to think and act for ourselves. One way of thinking about countering subversion is to pick up this theme of traditional counterintelligence, which many of you will remember from Cold War days, but in a modern digital setting. In the Cold War, 80% of the effort to keep our secret you got from security hygiene, vetting staff, classifying documents, locking them away at night, bars on the windows, and so on. But to defeat the advanced Cold War threat actor, like the KGB or the GRU, you had to enter the intelligence space. So you had covert surveillance of Soviet embassies and their diplomats. We attacked their communications, such as the Venona decrypts, and we recruited double agents and defectors inside the Soviet and Warsaw Pact agencies to identify the moles inside our services. We need the equivalent cybersecurity hygiene today: passwords, patches, encryption, network monitoring, and personnel vetting. To defend against the more advanced persistent threats, such as Russia, however, we also have to enter the intelligence space. We need inside information on those who are attacking our networks, and we need to know how to make their task harder. Just think about the Russian capacity to interfere in a future crisis through cyber disruption, distracting our political leaders and affecting our ability to mobilize. So, let me just pick one example to conclude with, which is how we might go about framing the defense of our democracy itself, consistent with encouraging peaceful exploitation of the cyber domain. I'm a great believer that if you write a strategy, you've got to be able to put it on the front of a T-shirt. So here I offer you 4 Ds, 4 levels of activity, each conveniently described by a word beginning with D. The first requirement is detect, because it may not be evident to us at the time when our systems are being penetrated. So we're going to need seamless systems to detect and attribute malicious activity. We're going to have to share a lot of information with the critical national infrastructure and industry at scale and pace, and attribute malign information activity that's directed at us. And we've all read about the sock puppets and the bots and the malicious web presence. For that, international cooperation is essential. The second D I describe as deflect. This is the deflect campaign. And the objective here should be to increase societal resilience so that most of the attempts to penetrate our networks and bamboozle the public with cyber frauds fail. So we need that 80%, the systems to be patched and updated, and the spear phishing emails to be recognized for what they are, and so on. And the public need to be warned of the disinformation threat that is facing them. Personally, I would say cybersecurity awareness, in its widest sense, should be a core school subject, teaching youngsters how to stay safe online. Now, you could say that's passive defense, but I prefer the term participatory defense, an all-of-nation effort. That might get us 70 or 80% of the way. The third level is D for disruption of attacks, so that even if they're launched, they don't land on our target. And this is where the principles of active defense come in, since there's a great deal that we can do to thwart attackers at a systems level by doing technical security stuff that users shouldn't have to bother about, so that bad websites get taken down and DNS requests to dodgy IP addresses don't get resolved, and so on. And the National Cybersecurity Centre in London, which is a key part of GCHQ, my old organisation, is now using these techniques to protect the UK space, cyberspace. I distinguish that from offensive cyber, and that's my final D for deterrence by denial, through having a targeted, responsible, offensive cyber capability. We're building one in the United Kingdom, our national cyber force, as a joint effort between the armed services and GCHQ, putting it under a new strategic command under General Sir Patrick Sanders. And their job is to conduct offensive operations, to raise the cost and difficulty to our adversaries, including countering information operations against us. We've already dipped a toe in this water. GCHQ took part in an offensive cyber campaign against the so-called Islamic State and frustrated much of their attempts to use cyberspace to spread their ideas, recruit foreign fighters, and circulate their atrocity videos. Of course, firm direction will be needed from democratic government for such campaigns. Strict legal and ethical standards of proportionality and necessity. And I might just make the point here that operating to higher ethical standards than our adversaries, by applying well-understood ethical principles, gives us, the democracies, an advantage, and not, as some might be tempted to see it, handicapping our efforts. And that's because the essence of defending ourselves against subversion is to engage in information operations whose very purpose is to influence the minds and actions of others. In all of this, cooperation with partners is essential. The greatest competitive advantage will come for the nations whose defense planners are able to work on this agenda with outside partners on the basis, as the General has said, of having established mutual trustworthiness. Many of those partners will be in the private sector or elsewhere in government. Many will be overseas, since no one nation can defend itself alone in the digital age. Well, I hope, General, I've said enough just to get a discussion going. I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Sir David, and welcome on stage for a round of Q&As. You can still send us your questions if you log on to slido.com and use the code hashtag AS21. I have a list as long as my arm with questions, but I think we can take a few more. I would like to start with the fuel crisis in the UK, Sir David. It's a fuel, food, and truck driver crisis. And one could say this is also about the pandemic. But I would like to ask you, do you think that Brexit has been harmful to UK's ability to total defense?
In the long run, I think you can argue it shouldn't make any difference if we're actually determined to do what we need to do. In the short run, it has caused disruption. I think that there's no shortage of fuel. It's just a shortage of drivers who have the right certificates to deliver the fuel to filling stations. So the army has volunteered, inverted commas, to provide some drivers who are being specially trained. They have a contingency plan. They've had one for years and years. And that's just one of the ways. But it's not a crisis, but what it illustrates, though, is what I was saying about being able to look ahead and spot trouble early enough. Because the problem really is that when the first news that there might be a bit of a shortage came out, quite rationally, the British public took their motor cars and filled them up to full. The average motor car, I don't know what the Oslo figure is, but in London, it's about a quarter of a tank. And you drive around with a quarter of a tank. Why waste money filling up a tank full if you don't have to? But if everyone in London fills up their tank, you empty the system overnight. And that's what happened. And then it takes you about a week or more to readjust. Now, if I have to say, the problem had been spotted a bit earlier, because it was well known as a problem, then public reassurance, the trustworthiness the General talked about, perhaps the public wouldn't have reacted in that way, and we would actually have avoided the problem altogether. So I think it does illustrate this, the need to try and get ahead of the game.
I think there will be a lot of questions connected to this. We have to talk about also total defense in a Norwegian perspective, General. There is a question here. What is the role of the Nordic countries for providing added value to the Norwegian total defense concept?
I think, from my perspective, I think there are lots to be gained by increasing the way we cooperate with our neighbors within the Nordic countries. And that will at least limit the risk in some aspects, for instance, in regards to logistics. That will make us less vulnerable. And also, we need to remember that as of today, we are very, very closely connected. I think most of our exports are coming into to Göteborg, for instance. So it's already a very, very close link. I think the other part from the military perspective is also that a close cooperation can help us spot when a Monday is no longer a regular Monday. It's easier to actually be able to spot those slow changes if we can compare our situational awareness with the one of our neighbors.
And the Norwegian Home Guard just had a common training with the Swedish Home Guard last week.
Yes, and then we are training together. There's on a weekly basis our fighters are training together. The same applies in the land domain, especially with the army. We have been going back and forth and training together. And also there will be a Swedish-Finnish brigade under my command on exercise called Response the upcoming winter.
Talking about seeing the long lines and seeing the conflicts coming, Sir David, with your intelligence background, Here is a question. How can intelligence support total defense? Do you see a need to reduce the protection of information in order to build better situational awareness?
Yes, and this has been going on now for quite a long time. If you take the attribution of cyber attacks as one example, only a few years ago this was regarded as deeply secret. That the Joint Intelligence Committee in London, I spent 7 years sitting on the Joint Intelligence Committee with our Five Eyes close partners, and we would arrive at a judgment. But you didn't tell anyone what that judgment was. Now you do. And the UK government has called out both the Russian state and the Chinese state.
Like the Norwegian government also did after the attack.
Yeah. And when you think of an attack like the NotPetya attack, which brought the almost destroyed Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, almost destroyed them overnight. That wasn't, as far as we can tell, an intentional attack to do that damage, but it caused $10 billion worth of damage to global industry. And it was all because a Russian group decided to take it out on some Ukrainian companies they didn't like, and they fed the malware into tax software that these companies were using. And it escaped. It was over-powerful, over-engineered malware and caused this havoc. Now, in those circumstances, this is why I emphasize explanation in my C's acronym. If we had explained that as part of the first phase of a Russian cyber attack on the West, the response from all of us would have been very different indeed. As it was, we can explain it, and they didn't intend to do all that much damage, but they did, so I hope they took the warning. But it will be really important that we all get together when these attacks take place and share our information and then act together, because if we're doing it as NATO, with all the NATO countries, it's more likely, I think, that Moscow will listen.
More questions keep coming in. Thomas is the next general. With the concept of collaboration in mind, how can the critical community functions cooperate better with different operational systems, such as radios, platforms, etc.?
I think we are seeing some progress actually by our recently introduced. And I think the man in charge is actually sitting here today. Our recently introduced national communication system, which is a way to communicate on a non-restricted manner, but still, that has really strengthened our ability to cooperate. And we've seen it both in crisis, but also during exercises. There's also a pretty large push throughout the Norwegian society in establishing also restricted communication systems. They will be limited, but I think by first having them in place and then also training on how to use them, that will give us an ability as a whole of society to defend ourselves.
Okay, two quick ones. In your view, what are the greatest needs of the Norwegian army going into the next few years? I guess you have a long list. What's on top of it?
I have a long list. I think actually what has been stated in the white paper is that pretty much answers not all, but most of the key critical capabilities. And of course, as all chiefs of army, I would like to have them faster. Besides from that, my key concern at the moment is actually keeping those soldiers, NCOs, and officers I have, because that will be the basis which we can build the larger army which is to come.
Which reminds me of the next question from Eirik Bjerke. What is the Major General's view on establishing a new brigade in the south of Norway in the same manner as the North Brigade?
I think there are many arguments for establishing a second brigade, which will not be the same as the mechanized Brigade North, but a brigade number 2, in the southern parts of Norway would enhance our ability to both handle military threats, but also to support the civilian society. So yes, of course, I'm pro for that one.
We have to mention the war in Afghanistan. Sir David, we have a question referring to the fall of Kabul as a black swan. Halvor Nielsen is asking, was it really a black swan, or might the intelligence community have predicted it, but being ignored by political leaders? What do you think, sir?
Yeah. Well, we got warning, didn't we, before the US presidential election, when President Trump tweeted that he wanted American soldiers out by Christmas. And that meant all of our soldiers out by Christmas, because they couldn't operate without the support provided by American forces. Then the election came, President Biden came in and repeated his view that the commitment had to come to an end. Now, an assumption was made, and made public, that the Afghan government and its armed forces, which we'd all been training, and its security forces would manage to hold the line. That assumption was deeply flawed. I can't explain why it was. Political expediency, perhaps, I don't know. But it was flawed. And the moment the Taliban had recognized that the commitment was going to end, they went round the provincial governors, they handed over the death letters saying, either fight us to the death or we will reach an accommodation with you. And most of them reached that accommodation. So although there was a possibility that the government in Kabul could hang on for, say, 6 months, it was very unlikely they were going to hang on for very long. As it was, even the Taliban was surprised how quickly the whole thing folded up. So you can't put that down to an intelligence failure. But the failure really is on that boundary between intelligence and policy.
General? Yeah.
And of course, I was also surprised, I think, like always. But I think it's a strong reminder of what happens when the trust is gone. When the trust is gone, the will to fight will also go, and then it all collapsed. Yeah. And I think that's a strong reminder for all of us, because we have, and lots of us are in uniform, we have seen the ability of the Afghan National Security Forces to fight when they actually believed and trusted their own government and their allied partners.
Yeah. Okay, we are still in Afghanistan. Christopher is asking you, General, after closing the 20-year chapter in Afghanistan and decreasing INTOPs, how do you think this will affect the readiness and experience on the troops?
I think we, at least we in the Army, recognize that our 20 years of experience in Afghanistan has significantly contributed to actually us having in the Army we have today. And it's about having personnel with combat experience, but it's actually also about we as an organization has evolved due to the combat experience we've been exposed to. And in regards to in the short to midterm, the end of Afghanistan will improve our readiness, because we can then focus on actually our national readiness to a larger extent. Yeah.
Can I just add to that I think the moral experience of young officers and non-commissioned officers holding the kinds of responsibilities which they had in Afghanistan will have a very positive effect.
Yeah, and then for us, it has underlined the importance of our core values, which we will come back to later.
Yes, we will. Okay, we can have a few more questions. National total defense requires the development of a population's will to defend. And now we're not talking about Afghanistan, but Norway and the surrounding countries. How can we instill this sense of shared vision on our younger generations? That's a big question.
Shall I just
the will to defend?
Throw in a thought, which is, if you take the British population, The British population is, as history shows, perfectly prepared to defend itself very vigorously. But over quite a long period, there has been this impression that, well, what's the threat? Why do we need to do this? And now in cyberspace, it's beginning to dawn on people that there is an adversary who is day in, day out, attacking us. And once this message gets through, so part of it, I think, is about educating the public about the realities of life today.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not concerned about the young generation. They are better than ever, from my perspective. And we get we have the luxury of having them serve in our ranks, and they are very, very professional and eager to serve their country. What I think is, I think you're right, Sir David. I think we need to discuss the different threats that we are facing without making them unrealistic or too large. But I think we need to have those discussions, and hopefully this is one of the events that will help us actually bringing this out. Because if you bring them out, I'm pretty sure our young folks will pick up on them and do their best.
Yes. A vital part of the Norwegian total defense concept is that we have to rely on our friends and allies in NATO. And we will soon be meeting a 4-star general in a German uniform. And he is absolutely somebody within NATO. How would you describe this capacity, General?
He's one out of 3 operational commanders in NATO. And he is...
Which means...
He is in charge of planning, preparing, and if necessary, executing operations to defend NATO.
Yeah.
And General Vollmer, as we are about to hear, he has a special focus on our area and also the northern parts of Europe. So he is definitely someone we should listen to and cooperate closely with, as we are doing.
Yes, we shall listen to him. He is a capacity, and he has a greeting and a keynote speech. Please welcome on the screen General Jörg Vollmer. Here he is.
Generals and Admirals, General Lervik, Lars, it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts from the perspective of JFC Brunssum. We are working hard at the moment. DDA concept, SSPs, regional plan, regional focus. But, and that is the basis of everything, we are already under constant threat. Russia uses all means in all domains. We are already in a permanent competition. You can call it hybrid war, gray zone, shadow war. We are already constantly in a competition. The killing of Skripal, the poisoning of Navalny, the constant cyber attacks we all faced, 2007 in Estonia, but at the Norwegian parliament as well as at the German parliament, constantly is probing us. And there's the influence in elections, there is fake and false news in the information domain. And Belarus at the moment, by pushing migrants, they fly in from Syria to the borders of Lithuania, Latvia and Poland, really creates a political crisis to a certain degree. So they're using all means to trying to probe us and to damage the cohesion of the alliance. One of the instruments of power, of course, is really impressive, and that is the military instrument of power. And during the last weeks, we observed doing Ocean Shield and Zapad what they are able to do. They have one great advantage. They have one language, they have one doctrine, they have one set of TTPs, they have one set of equipment, and they have the chance and the ability to use all the means to support whatever the military is doing. And that has been demonstrated during Zapad. They are using the inner line in a way like maneuver warfare should really be done. They can move large formations from left to the right or north to the south at our eastern flank. And what impressed me quite a lot, not most, but a lot, are their capabilities in electronic warfare. They have these assets incorporated down even to the regimental and battalion group level. That is something we have to consider, and it's a question, how do we react, and how do we defend against it? Where do we stand? Since 2014, the illegal annexation of Crimea, the war which started in Ukraine, NATO reacted. NATO reacted on 4th of September 2014 at Wales, and we had a new concept for the NRF implemented. We put the MNC Northeast from a lower level to a high readiness standard, and 2 years later, in 2016, the EFP battle groups and the NATO force integration units were decided and 6 months later implemented. So far, NATO reacted on the political level and by operationalizing it really in warp speed. But it's not enough. We have to rebuild capabilities. We have to regain a coherent C2 structure. We have to be honest about our deficiencies. We have to identify gaps, and most of them we have already identified, and step by step we have to close those gaps. We have to get rid of our Iraq and Afghanistan muscle memory. We have to get back to our standards of standardization we once had in the 1980s. And that's not only for military standardization, it's also between the military and the civilian side. And geography matters. Geography is important. You can't think of the deterrence and defense of Norway without the Baltic Sea region and the European depths. Or, in other words, Central and Northern Europe geographically belongs together. Just have a look at the map. And this includes, of course, Sweden and Finland, and you are much better aware of it than I am, and I know that you have those close interrelationships and all the exercises and your talks, and you are constantly working together. If we talk deterrence, we need to be capable to defend. Resilience of our countries, it's important. And I really would like to compliment Norway to your total defense concept. That is something special, and not all of our countries have something in their own countries. We need to talk about forces, first and second responders. Yes, of course, we always keep the 360 degree in our thinking and in our planning. However, we, Norway, and all the other countries are at first hand responsible for the defense of our homeland and of the region. We need to align forces. Align, assess, earmark, whatever you would like to use. Where is our main priority? Where is the main priority of our forces we have available? And we need to exercise them. Trident Juncture in 2018 in Norway and Cold Response next year will offer us a great opportunity again to exercise on large-scale operations in all domains, and that is important. We are aiming, of course, for joint effects or better, and in the near future, about all-domain warfare. But that is already true for deterrence as well, in all-domain deterrence. And we all need to understand what effects we want to achieve, and we need to give appropriate advice to our governments. In the end, it's all about money spending, and we have to give advice, honest advice, where we have identified gaps and how to close these gaps step by step and together with the nations. Please, let's get out of the PowerPoint deterrence and defense. A division is a division if it really has the appropriate means and capabilities and division troops. Otherwise, it's just a command post. You can only use those forces today in the region which are available. So therefore, we really have to understand what forces are available and how to best use them. As I said earlier, we are already in a constant conflict. Call it hybrid, shadow, or gray zone. And out of so many books I've read, and you read as well, I always recommend one book, which is David Kilcullen, Dragons and Snakes. And he describes very nice how the Russians react, how they probe us. They always try to stay below the threshold of Article 5. So all the examples I mentioned earlier are very well orchestrated by Russia just to stay below the political decision of stepping up our forces, to try to drive wedges into the cohesion of the alliance. Geography matters. And in the end, it will always be the land forces, who will effectively deter and defend our countries. Yes, we think an all-domain campaign, but in the end, those who will be on the ground and will bring the success are land forces. And I say it really by heart, and not only because I make infantry. We need to continue to train together, to be capable to fight under your harsh conditions in Norway. It doesn't help us on a PowerPoint slide just to identify some forces somewhere in Europe which don't have the equipment, which don't have the mentality, and which don't have the capability to fight under these conditions. So therefore, this goes back to my point, to align, to assess, to earmark forces which are capable to pick up the deterrence and the fight if necessary. NATO, of course, provides the umbrella, and the SAS is guiding us into the direction. But we need to understand that regional cohesion and regional responsibility is the basis. So for our common task is to deter and to defend our respective countries in the region. And that is our responsibility in Brunssum, in the Baltic Sea region, in the European depths, and Norway, of course, is always part of it. You can't defend the European depths or the Baltic Sea region without Norway, and we will not be able to deter and defend Norway without taking all the countries around the Baltic Sea region into consideration. Finally, a few words on enablement. We need to improve our infrastructure. It's about harbors, airfields, roads, bridges. We need to talk about standardization again. And that is not only, again, military standardization. Just to remind you, the oldest NATO agency is the Agency for Standardization. But that is also the standardization means we need to implement again, which we signed all the way, by the way, between the development of military equipment and by taking into consideration the infrastructure. We have to talk about pre-contracting, national and JSAC and SJLSG level. We need to talk about sustainment. Do we have sufficient ammunition? Do we have sufficient lubrics and everything we need already in place? Or are we capable to move and deploy them as fast as we need? And we have to take into consideration legal constraints, of course. If we have a developing crisis somewhere in our region, this is far below the threshold of Article 5. So therefore, one nation or two are already in emergency, but the others are still in peacetime. So the question then boils down, who is first, the passenger train or the train with our tanks and infantry fighting vehicle? So cold response will allow us to further develop our requirements, and I'm really looking forward to participate with the NRF in cold response. And we are preparing for that already. So the Rapid Reaction Corps France will be the land component commander, and the VJTF, the whole brigade, will deploy to Norway, the same as we saw it in 2018 during Trident Juncture. And that's good. It trains us. It gets us, again, this feeling of what do we need to plan in advance to be successful in the end. Lars, I wish you and the audience, and especially the Norwegian Army, all the best for your conversations, for your discussions, and I'm really hoping forward that we will meet soon again, and maybe latest then during Brilliant Jump or Cold Response. All the best, good luck, and have a good conference.
Thank you so much, General Vollmer. You're leaving really no room for doubt on NATO's concern about Russia. What is your comment on this speech, General?
I think we need to take notice that this is NATO's view on the overall situation, and that of course is also something we need to take into consideration. However, our relationship to Russia is slightly different from quite a lot of the other NATO members. We have a historical link with having both, of course, deterrence, but also a linkage with engagement, for instance, in fisheries. We also see it on the military realm.
That's exactly my point, because when we see the media coverage on the Russian military activity, it's a lot of focus on their submarines in the northern part of our neighborhood, in the Arctic part, and also their strategic bombers. How would you describe the situation on the Norwegian mainland along the borders?
If you're thinking what's on the eastern side of the border,
Yes.
That's. I think we've seen a change both in size, activity, and complexity. I'm going to try to be brief, but again, we are seeing new units being introduced, both in the army and naval infantry. We are seeing new systems, equipment coming in, like T-80 modernized main battle tanks, long-range precision systems. We are seeing new types of activity, that's already mentioned by the general, movement of formations and also strategic missile systems from other parts of Russia to our border. And we're seeing an increase in their activities and their ability to do complex maneuvers involving both air, land, and sea assets working together.
Good. Sir David, in the States now, and also in Norway, among scientists and academics, there is a debate ongoing whether the US as a democracy is about to implode. We just talked about the state in UK after Brexit, and the whole situation in the politics in Northern Europe. How do you see this picture?
Well, if you look at it historically,
yes, please.
You have periods of instability. You have, at the political level, countries argue sometimes to talk about implosion of democracy is, I think, entirely fanciful. We have seen more polarization, so extreme positions. And this has been noticed, frankly, by Russia. So Russia has been promoting both extremes, and they've done that in Germany, they've done it in the United States, they did it in France, because they want tension, because it distracts us. It makes life for our political leadership harder. It's what you would do. It's about competition. It's not a prelude to war. Provided NATO, and I thought the general statement was really very powerful, provided NATO holds together, provided the United States remains committed, along with the European allies, in investing as it is necessary to keep NATO strong, we will not have a major war in Europe. That's the purpose of it, is to prevent another major war in Europe. So I'm pretty confident about that. What does that do in Moscow? It means that they will continue to modernize, as you heard, they introduce new systems, they have some advantages in being able to move their forces around, as the general said. But provided we hold our nerve, what we'll actually see is the competition goes down below the threshold of armed attack on NATO. Now, if we did nothing about that, we would simply experience more and more of it, which is why I emphasized in my remarks, we have to counter, for example, disinformation. We have to get on the front foot in the cyber domain.
That's a good keyword, because we are come to the last question, talking about the cyberspace challenge. And you have to answer briefly, both of you. In what way will the threat within cyberspace challenge NATO defense? Does it call for a more aggressive defense? Gentlemen? Sir?
Two things. Firstly, NATO has to look to its own defenses. We are vulnerable. Our infrastructure is vulnerable. Our mobilization arrangements are vulnerable to cyber attack until we really put effort into that. The other thing is that we mustn't give any adversary, I don't want to just singularize Russia, any adversary, a free ride. We have to raise the cost to the adversary of behaving badly.
Yeah, definitely agree. And also, just to add to that one, I think it also stresses the fact that in the future, our defense has to be including not only the military aspects, but also the civilian aspects, and going back again to the total defense that we are discussing here.
Good. Sir David, I want to say thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for your keynote and for taking part in this discussion. I never got to the question, how do spies think?
You have to read the book.
I have to read the book. Thank you so much. Please sit down among the audience, because we are now shifting focus and soon language as well. Thank you again. Give him a big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sir David. General, I know you have been looking forward to this part of the program in particular, because you are just about to hand out a reward. We're talking about this, in Norwegian, a RAM award, 3 letters that in English stand for respect, responsibility, and courage. For those of us, we don't know much about this, like me. What is this award?
Well, it's based on the fact that we as an army, we are value-based, and we are doing our best to live out the values of the society that we are defending. And this means it's not something we put on a pamphlet. This is actually something we try to practice. And this is about who we are, what we do, also when no one is looking. And what we will do and our core values are, as you already said, respect, responsibility, and courage. And what we are about to do now is to recognize 3 excellent representatives of the Norwegian Army that each represent the respect, responsibility, and courage. And it also, and not only represented, but actually live those values. And they are serving as examples of what the Norwegian Army is and wants to be in the future, that being in peacetime or in wartime.
And for our international guests, they have to excuse us our language, because the rest of this will be conducted in Norwegian. Now, 3 awardees are waiting in suspense. I say thank you, General, for now, and please, the award is about to happen.
Thank you. Forsvaret og Hærens førsteprioritet er våre kjerneverdier. Respekt, ansvar og mot. Og verdiene våre er ikke noe vi bare snakker om, det er noe vi lever. Hver dag, året rundt. Gjennom å leve verdiene våre, så er vi i stand til å løse de oppdragene og ta vare på soldatene. Det er gjennom verdiene våre at forsvarsevnen, og ikke minst forsvarsviljen, skapes og opprettholdes. Ansvaret og det privilegiet som følger med å ha flagget på skuldra, representeres gjennom kjerneverdiene våre. RAM-prisen er vår måte å hedre noen av våre hverdagshelter. De som hver dag lever verdiene våre. Vi skal nå anerkjenne noen helt spesielle soldater som setter spor etter seg hver dag. Også når ingen ser på. De her soldatene har blitt løftet frem som de rollemodellene vi alle trenger. Det er soldater som gjør Hæren bedre, og som jeg er umåtelig stolt over. Respektprisen for 2021 tildeles kommandersersjant Ebbe Næss. Kommandersersjant Ebbe Næss har I rollen som bataljonsersjant og medmenneske vært en rollemodell og etterlevd kjerneverdien respekt langt utover det som kan forventes. Næss har etter en tragisk dødsulykke fulgt opp og ivaretatt pårørende og involverte soldater på en verdig og respektfull måte. I tiden etter ulykka og frem til I dag har han sørget for at ingen har falt utenfor, og vist en beundringsverdig respekt og tilstedeværelse for de involverte. Ved å alltid være tilgjengelig og gi av seg selv har vært en stor belastning for han. En pris han har vært villig til å betale for å tilvareta de involverte, for å ta vare på soldatene. Kommandersersjant Ebbe Næss et forbilde for Hæren og etterlevd Hærens kjerneverdige respekt på en fremragende måte. Bardufoss 1. oktober 2021, Lars Lervik, generalmajor, sjef Hæren. Ansvarsprisen 2021 tildeles visekorporal Andreas Huseby Hereid. Visekorporal Andreas Huseby Hereid har vist utpreget ansvarsglede og lederskap I sin tjeneste som lagfører under sin førstegangstjeneste I Hans Majestet Kongens Garde. Hereid har som ung leder vist en modenhet og ansvarsfølelse langt utover det som kan forventes. Gjennom sitt utpregede ansvarsfølelse har han utviklet og fulgt opp sine medsoldater innenfor alle områder, også de han ikke har hatt det formelle ansvaret for. Han har aktivt bidratt til å gjøre både undergitte og overordnede bedre, og vært et eksempel på hvilken positiv effekt unge ledere kan ha på sin avdeling. Visekorporal Andreas Huseby Hereid et forbilde for oss I Hæren, og har etterlevd Hærens kjerneverdige ansvar på en fremragende måte. Bardufoss 1. oktober 2021, Lars Lervik, generalmajor, sjef Hæren. Gratulerer. Motprisen for 2021 tildeles major Edith Mutamulisa Alnes. Major Edith Mutamulisa Alnes har utvist stort mot å ta ansvar for å ta opp utfordrende problemstillinger I den offentlige debatten. Alnes har vært en tydelig og modig stemme I krevende debatter rundt blant annet likestilling, kvotering, mobbing og seksuell trakassering. Hun har våget å uttrykke sine meninger I temaer der mange uenige med henne. Dette motet har vært en døråpner for andre til å kunne ytre sine meninger, samt hevet takhøyden I de krevende og offentlige diskusjonene. Major Edith Mutamulisa Alnes et forbilde for Hæren, og har etterlevd Hærens kjerneverdige mot på en fremragende måte. Bardufoss 1. oktober 2021, Lars Lervik, generalmajor, sjef Hæren. Gratulerer. Da tenker jeg at vi gir dem en skikkelig applaus. De fortjener applaus, de å tenke.
Da synes jeg, general, det på tide å ønske prisvinnerne opp på scenen her hos meg. Nå det jo bare du som har snakket til deg og om deg. Nå vil jeg høre deres egen versjon av dette. Velkommen på plass. Og gratulerer med prisen, alle tre. Edith, Andreas, Ebbe. Dere var så fullastet med utmerkelse at jeg fikk ikke tatt dere i handa. Men altså... Mot, ansvar, respekt. Jeg begynner med den, skal vi si, modigste, Edith. Her får du altså en pris for å ha talt mange kollegaer og overordnet midt imot om ganske touchy temaer, også i Forsvaret. Hva tenker du om at du får denne prisen?
Først og fremst så har det jo vært stort at det anerkjennes, fordi det føles... vanskelig å vite hvordan det mottas, fordi man varsom på spesielt de temaene jeg har engasjert meg i. Da. Og det gjelder jo spesielt fordi at det rører ved både menn og kvinner. Det rører ved samfunnets krav, målsetninger, og kanskje for en kvinne å si at vi har kommet langt, og kanskje motstander av et halvfestet. Jeg ønsker jo ikke, som vi har diskutert, jeg ønsker jo ikke at man skal ha kvinner i Forsvaret fordi, eller jeg ikke unik fordi at jeg kvinne og halvt afrikansk. Jeg ønsker jo å være unik, være en dyktig sjef basert på egenskaper, og ikke være et tallgrunnlag da.
Du jo først og fremst heil offiser, her jeg ser deg.
Ja.
Men for de som ikke har fått med seg eller følt med og vet alt som har foregått, hvor hardt har du gått ut?
Og det jo flere årsaker, men jeg har jo valgt å ta en periode fri fra Forsvaret, skal jeg si det sånn.
Ja.
Ja, vi kaller det fri. For jeg har jo...
En pause?
Forsvaret jo for meg vært livet mitt, da. Jeg har jo flyttet, levd og synes at det vanskelig å prioritere både familie, venner og hvor jeg bor. Fordi Forsvaret, og spesielt de jeg ledet, da, som årsaken til innstillingen, har vært som familien min. Da. Så det å snakke for dem, for menn som opplever at kvinner verdsettes høyere, kanskje, i enkelte øyne, hvor jeg da var den eneste kvinnen av 68, så det viktig for meg å si at de verdifulle for deres egenskaper og kvaliteter.
Men hvordan det å få denne anerkjenningen noen etter at du har søkt og fått innvilget permisjon?
Som jeg sa til sjefen, så det jo når jeg tar på uniform, så det jeg føler meg mest hjemme. Det jo identiteten min. Så det føles jo som at kanskje Lervik mener han sier at døra alltid åpen ved å få også prisen.
Nå har de i hvert fall fått et instrument til å dirke opp døra om ikke den skulle være åpen. Ebbe, mange vil jo sikkert si at du også har utvist mot i ditt møte med kollegaer og familie til en ung soldat som mistet livet i en ulykke på Mauken skytefelt i 2020. Nå det respekt Forsvaret og Hærens ledelse vil gi deg honnør for. Hva koblingen mellom å vise empati for medmennesker og respekt?
Nei, for meg først så det jo det spesielt å sitte her i dag. Det med stor ydmykhet jeg sitter her. For meg så har denne hendelsen og det som har kommet i ettertid handlet om å først og fremst være tilgjengelig for alle som har hatt behov for å ha meg der. Jeg har også lært mye etter denne hendelsen, men det å klare å sette andre og annet før deg selv nok det som har vært viktigst for meg i kjølvannet av denne hendelsen her.
Ja, du var jo ikke bare i kjølvannet, du var jo rett og slett med samme natta som ulykka skjedde, der altså en soldat mistet livet, en annen ble hardt skadd. Du var med å rydde opp i skytefeltet. Har det vært mulig å ikke bli, skal vi si, personlig, men å være profesjonell, empatisk offiser i dette?
Jeg har gjort et tappert forsøk, men jeg må innrømme det at i perioder så har det vært krevende. Fordi du kommer så tett på ikke bare hendelsen og den personen i dette tilfellet her, Hågen Skattum, som mistet livet sitt. Og ikke minst familie, venner, kolleger, og også andre familiemedlemmer indirekte involvert av denne hendelsen. Det har vært vitner som alvorlig traumatiserte etter hendelsen. Og det koster også for familien å få en traumatisert soldat hjem etter å ha vært vitne til noe så grusomt. Så i forhold til det å klare å ikke bli personlig, så må jeg erkjenne at det har vært vanskelige perioder.
For du også har jo kommet hjem til en familie som har tatt imot en nokså emosjonelt utmattet, sliten kar.
Ja, det er gjerne da man finner ut av det. Når man får spørsmål ved spisebordet, hvor er du egentlig nå? Og det er da man våkner opp litt og finner ut at det handler ikke bare om meg heller. Det handler også om de som jeg kommer hjem til og skal fungere for og med. Så det har også vært samtidig, det er utrolig viktig for meg å fremheve den familien jeg har hatt hjemme, kone og 2 barn, som faktisk har løftet meg opp, men sist, men ikke minst også fantastiske kolleger, sjefer, venner, ingeniørbataljon må jeg få lov å fremheve generelt. Kompani 1, hvor dette skjedde. Så det er så mange mennesker som er berørt av det.
Og så har jo du fått et realt løft her nå fra sjefen, men du sier likevel du er nøyen på at dette er ikke en pris du er glad for å få. Hva er du da?
Jeg er utrolig takknemlig for at jeg også har blitt sett. Og så var sjef her inne på det tidligere, med tanke på det og hva man gjør når ikke alle andre ser det. Det er vel mest sannsynlig det jeg er mest takknemlig for akkurat nå, at mange har også sett og fått med seg ting som ikke nødvendigvis man kunne fått med seg rett.
Ja. Og en annen som har blitt sett, det er jo deg, Andreas. Du har blitt sett og lagt merke til å bli skildret som et talent av det sjeldne. Vi skal komme tilbake til dine fremtidsplaner. Det er ansvar, din ansvarsevne og ansvarsvilje du har blitt hedret for. Jeg må aller først spørre deg, hva grad har du?
Jeg er visekorporal.
Ja, det betyr jo at du rent gradsmessig ikke har all verdens med ansvar på dine skuldre.
Ikke hvis du leser stillingsbeskrivelsen min, nei.
Ikke sant? Det er ganske tynn liten blekke. Likevel så er du en kar som springer rundt og tar ansvar nærmest overalt der du kan, virker det som. Hva dreier dette seg om?
Til syvende og sist så har jeg egentlig lært i løpet av min korte fartstid i Forsvaret at måten systemet er på fikk meg til å se ting på en litt annerledes måte, der jeg kjente selv at jeg ville gjøre meg selv til en størst mulig ressurs. Der jeg også så på gradsystemet som vi har, der jeg innså egentlig at grad er vel en sluttilstand av det ansvar du sitter med og må stå for til slutt, men en grad definerer aldri hva ansvar du kan ta. Og det var for meg den viktigste delen av min hverdag, spesielt i måten vi jobber på i HMKG, der rollene som blir stilt til deg som både lagfører er masse større enn det som da en stillingsbeskrivelse skulle si. Og det er ofte deg som person som avgjør hva rolle du får.
Men det at en ung vestlending med visekorporalsgrad går rundt og, skal vi si, tar så mye ansvar, da kan ikke det også, i teorien i alle fall, by på visse utfordringer i et militært system?
Det spørs. Hittil har jeg bare opplevd ledelsen min som takknemlig for de ansvarsrollene jeg fyller i systemet vi jobber. Sånn som vi jobber også i HMKG, så er vi også avhengig av at man tør også ta ansvar. Vi er ofte i ulike setninger lite bemannet på x antall soldater, som er litt mer enn det man kanskje burde være. Og da er det helt klart at det å ha en bunnsøyle også, som tar ansvar, og fylle en rolle som ikke nødvendigvis man skal fylle på papiret, det er særs viktig for å nå best mulig oppdragsløsning.
Du gikk fra førstegangstjeneste inn i, skal vi si, lønnet arbeid i Garden i august i fjor. Det aner meg at hvis jeg holder ut lenge nok, så møter jeg deg med generalsgrad. Har du de ambisjonene dine?
Jeg har i hvert fall innsett at mulighetene er mange, og interessen hos meg er stor. Og jeg har funnet ut at jeg også har god tid, og jeg har troet på å utvikle erfaring over tid, og kunne lære mest mulig. Jeg er heldig som får lov å sitte her i dag og kunne ta og snakke med mange som jeg ellers aldri ville sett, og lære av det, og det synes jeg er givende.
Veldig bra. Hadde nær sagt Carpe Diem. Lykke til, Andreas. Jeg vil fortsette på avslutningsvis snakke om fremtiden.
Ja.
Edith, vi har hatt skal vi si, oppgjør i alle deler av det norske samfunnet som involverer seksuell trakassering, forskjellsbehandling mellom kjønnene, kvoteringsdiskusjonen. Du har selv, sier du, og hatt god grunn til å tvile på om du sitter rundt bordet fordi du er halvt afrikansk kvinne eller en sabla god offiser. Tenker du at den heiden som sjefherren i dag har gitt deg, også er et varsel om en endring?
Ja, det tror jeg absolutt. Jeg tror det som vi bygger mer på nå er jo at vi ønsker jo et mangfold bygd av reflekterte mennesker som klarer å ta et standpunkt. Det har blitt et større takhøyde, har jeg inntrykk av. Om det ikke var fordi at jeg ikke opplevde det som ung løytnant, så har jeg i hvert fall opplevd det som kaptein. At takhøyden eksisterer, at vi beveger oss mot et åpent rom. Det jeg alltid har savnet i Forsvaret er jo den åpne spørretimen. At ikke vi påføres endring, eller at jeg får vite at jeg ønsker å vite hvis jeg blir kvotert inn på stabsskole. Og det ville jeg aldri fått vite. Jeg ville bare fått vite at jeg fikk plass. Og den endringen må vi gjøre og gi et valg da. Ønsker du å få vite at du får mer erfaring? Du mangler erfaring, så ikke alle andre i rommet tenker det for deg, og du også tenker det selv. Og dit må vi bevege oss i større grad. Og det er jo grunnen til at jeg har villet si det, er jo, jeg leste nylig «People can't be inspired by you if they can't see you as a human first». Og det er litt derfor jeg som kompanisjef følte at jeg måtte si høyt det jeg uttrykker for de. Hva er det som er viktig? Hvor er OMT? Hvor er URE? Vi må snakke om det for å bygge en forståelse og en kohersjon da. Vi ønsker å bevege oss i samme retning, og ikke bli dratt og polarisert.
Ebbe med blikk inn i fremtiden. Forsvaret jobber jo som mange andre hver eneste dag for å forbedre seg, sikre at ulykker og uønskede hendelser ikke skjer. Og så vet vi at også Forsvaret tidligere med eller uten dette har fått kritikk for å ikke ta vare og følge opp sine medarbeidere godt nok. Nå har du altså fått en pris nettopp fordi du har gjort det utover det en kan forvente. Tenker du at også dette er et slags signal om at Forsvaret både har blitt og vil bli enda bedre på å ivareta?
Ja, absolutt. Og når du stiller spørsmålet, det første jeg tenker på er alle jeg har rundt meg. Jeg har hatt rundt meg ingeniørbataljon for eksempel hver dag. Fokuset er der. Handlingene, ikke bare ordene. Så jeg har en veldig god følelse på i forhold til fremtidens ivaretakelse av personellet vårt. Uten tvil.
Bra. Alle tre, nok en gang gratulerer, og tusen takk for at dere kom hit og snakket med meg. Bli bare sittende, fordi jeg skal si at denne første dagen av Army Summit 2020 er i ferd med å gå mot slutten. And to our international guests, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for being with us here today, and welcome back tomorrow at the same time. Back to Norwegian. Da skal vi ha et skarpere fokus på totalforsvaret i Norge. Da kommer mellom andre direktøren i Direktoratet for sikkerhet og beredskap, samfunnssikkerhet og beredskap, sjef Heimevernet og ikke minst selvsagt sjef Hæren er med også i morgen. Vi er online klokka 17 og tilbake her fra Ridehuset i Oslo på den tid. Nå slutter vi med en kraftfull applaus til RAM-prisvinnerne. Takk for oss.